Welcome to the podcast, Martin. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Lesley. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask all my guests. What's your money story?
So I've listened to a few of your podcasts previously, trying to look for some inspiration here. And I think my earliest memory, certainly around money, was a school trip, probably in the mid 1980s when we went to the Isle of Wight on a school trip, school day out or something like that. And I used my £2 pocket money that we had at the time to buy 20 wham bars. I don't know if you remember them.
Oh, they were these I do. I used to love wham bars.
Yeah, these chewy, chewy bars full of sherbet in the middle. And I had a very sweet tooth. And on the ferry home, I spotted an opportunity to sell my wham bars for some money. So I bought my 20 wham bars for 10p each, and I sold them for 50p to £1 each on the ferry home.
Very entrepreneurial.
The only problem with that was you had to return your cash at the end of the day to the headmaster, and he would give it to you at the end of term. So I could hardly go back to him, having turned my £2 into £10. So I quickly got into trouble for having a lot of money on my person. But that's probably my earliest recollection of money. I've never been someone who's I'm not a saver and I'm not a spender. You know, I kind of believe that you sort of work to live. I think that's really important. Money certainly does make life easier. But I mean, I'm now with my startup, I'm self-funding that. So obviously I'm very conscious and aware of money, but I have a rule of thumb when it comes to investment decisions for whatever I need to do for my startup. I'm bootstrapping. I have a fantastic editor in Bristol called David. I call him my editor. And every unit I call, I kind of look at my investment decision when someone offers me a product or something. I say, how many hours of David could I get for this thing that it's going to cost me? And generally that means I disregard most things that are put to me, but that helps keep me fairly sane and level-headed, certainly for bootstrapping my business.
Yeah. And from the story you've just told there about, your first memory of money and that entrepreneurial streak, was that something that was developed? It was clearly developed in your childhood, but was that as a result of anything that you experienced, or do you think that you were just opportunistic to a certain extent in your approach to life?
Purely opportunistic. My dad at that point had a corporate job, very staid, very boring accountancy. So certainly I didn't get anything from my father, and nothing that had been socialized in terms of upbringing to that point, because I must have been around, I want to say sometime between 10 to 13. My dad went on to own or to set up and run a successful startup in software distribution, but that was afterwards. So yeah, that was just one of those things, an opportunistic moment to make some cash, although the headmaster never gave me my money back.
That is terrible, isn't it? Is that not called theft?
With all the stuff that's coming out now about schools and behaviour, yeah, I'm sure someone would have something to say about it, but it was a good life lesson.
Yeah. It's funny, I can remember a very similar story that from my brother. My brother was on a school trip, and this is going back to probably around the 1980s, I would imagine, early 1980s or so. And he had one of these Pac-Man devices. And we didn't know this until probably a good few years later. He would bring his Pac-Man device on these trips, not to play with himself, but he would charge his friends 50p a game. 50p a game, which I thought at the time was daylight robbery. But actually, now that I am an entrepreneur, I am thinking, good on you. You spotted a gap in the market, and you made the most of it. So good on you for doing the same, even though you didn't get to enjoy the fruits of your entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, and that's a nice story of your brother. Did he maintain his entrepreneurial spirit?
No, he's now a partner for one of the big accountancy firms, and the name is completely eluding me at the moment. So he certainly continued his joy of numbers and money, but he doesn't work for himself. He works for somebody else, for a corporate company, basically. So no, but mind you, I don't know whether the same for you. Do you remember making the decision to become a business owner, to become an entrepreneur?
I mean, well, certainly my current startup, OT, it's relatively young. We only incorporated last summer. But I do remember the first time I did it, which was when I was living and working in London, working for Skype at the time, and Microsoft came in and acquired Skype for $8.5 billion or something, which at that time was silly money. Today, that's it's laughed at.
A relatively inexpensive company. Yes.
Exactly. But yeah, at that point, I was in a long distance relationship with a girl in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And the thing with a long distance relationship is at some point you have to commit or walk away. I moved to Switzerland. The relationship didn't work out, but then I started on my entrepreneurial journey. So that was, I guess, the first time I did it. Probably learned a lot from that, made quite a few mistakes as well. So I'm hoping for better luck second time round.
And I think that is the thing. I think as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, the road to success is never a simple one. It's never a straightforward one. There are huge amounts of deviations, blocks in the road, etc., etc. What do you think has been your biggest lesson so far?
Good question. So I'm an only child, and I grew up with my dad and my stepmom, but I never really got to know my mother. And I think as a byproduct of some of my childhood experiences, I became quite introverted and independent, and I wouldn't ask for help or guidance. And that's certainly something I'm very aware of now, second time around. That I think, what is it? I want to say it's Notting Hill with Hugh Grant, which says "No man is an island." But well, we're all sometimes not very good at asking for advice. But I think men in particular, we can be very kind of stoic and refuse to ask for directions and all these cliches. But certainly now I'm much better at putting my hand up and asking for help, asking for advice. Realize that, especially now because I'm working in mental health, which is a hugely complex and fast evolving topic.
Yeah.
No one can know everything. We're still learning so many things about the human mind. So certainly I'm much better at putting my hand up and saying help.
Yeah. And were you avoiding asking for help when you were in corporate life when you needed it? Or do you think it's a trait that's developed since being an entrepreneur?
I think in corporate life, look, I was very lucky. I worked for some phenomenal brands with fairly rich resources. When you're working for companies that are backed by the likes of Nokia, Ericsson, Motorola, there's fairly deep pockets, big expense accounts, etc. So surrounded by great people who made my job a lot easier, for sure. I went through a period of, I guess, certainly depression, where I went really into my cave about 4 or 5 years ago. And it took me a good year to come out of that. And thanks to my now very supportive wife, at the time we were just living together, it was her encouragement, her leaving breadcrumbs to encourage me to come out and have a conversation and actually talk about my struggles. And having gone through therapy, spent a lot of time with a wonderful psychotherapist, I'm much better now at asking for help and recognizing my own limitations. They call it self-care, self-compassion.
Mm.
But I think I needed to go through that experience to really hit those low points to now be much more aware of the need to ask for help. And certainly when it comes to mental health, men are terrible at this. They say 40% of men have never talked to anybody, and that includes loved ones, GPs, best mates. They've never talked to anybody about their mental health. So I consider myself lucky in that sense.
Yeah. And the reason I asked you the question is because I spent 20 years in corporate life, and then I started my entrepreneurial journey 13 or so years ago. And I can really resonate with the fact that, particularly at the start of my journey, I thought I had to know it all. I thought I had to be completely self-sufficient and self-reliant. And I've reflected back over time on why that was the case, because as you said, in corporate life, we tend to be in these stoves, don't we, where we do something. We're either in sales, or we're in marketing, or we're in product development, or we're in finance, or we're in customer service, whatever it might be. And I know I never ever shied from asking somebody if I didn't know something. I'd pick up the phone to the relevant department and I'd ask them the question. And I can remember the first few days when I joined my husband's business, but finding myself reaching for the phone to ask a question, thinking, oh, I can't do that. That person isn't at the end of the phone. And I think it's taken me quite some time to be honest with myself about the gaps there were in my knowledge, in my experience, in those areas I didn't really particularly like, but to recognize, well, you don't have to do them, Lesley. You can find somebody who's better at it than you, or you can find somebody who can teach you how to do it, or you can simply give that task away to someone else. So that was the reason why I asked that question. What you said with regards to mental health and how men in particular are not good at putting up their hands and asking for help, has that been exacerbated by the pandemic and the fact that we are working more in isolation than we were prior to the pandemic?
I don't have a good answer to that, I don't think. I think on the one hand, the pandemic has encouraged us to talk about mental health more than we've ever done it before.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be a good thing. There was clearly some people had very traumatic pandemics, lost loved ones, etc. So our experiences weren't universal,
No.
Certainly. But I believe one of the good things to come out of the pandemic is that we now have an awareness that mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what your gender, your skin color, how much cash you have in the bank. Mental health can affect us all. I think certainly that men, historically anyway, there's still this gender imbalance or this stigma that men have to be strong, have to be stoic. And certainly growing up in the UK, I was taught that, children should be seen and not heard. And I think there are cultural issues here, certainly at play. Like the Quran, for example, doesn't allow kids to say, "I'm not okay." You're always fine, even if you're struggling. So there are cultural nuance differences at play. I would say, over on the whole, we're better at talking about it. Certainly now we now see an awful lot of noise about mental health and well-being. But has it encouraged more people to talk about it? Not sure. I think it depends on generations. Like Gen Z are very, very good at talking about their mental health and well-being. Our generation, and even especially my parents' generation, my dad is just turned 80, he can't comprehend anything to do with mental health. When I set up my startup last year, I had a huge argument with him about the use of the word stigma. He felt that the use of stigma itself was a dirty word. And that's one that shouldn't be aired in public. So I think in some ways we've come a long way as a society, but we've still got a long way to go in terms of normalizing the conversation.
And I don't know whether this is too hard or too generic a question to answer, but the attitude your dad has, is that because of our culture, the British culture around, a stiff upper lip? Or do you think because that generation either went through the Second World War or went through the recovery after the Second World War, that they are, as far as they're concerned, more robust in how they approach the things that are happening in the world and have happened to the world over the last few years?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer as well. From my father's perspective, I think it's purely ignorance, doesn't want to know. And so I think, as I shared with you when we chatted about this, my mother was sectioned under the Mental Health Act in the late 70s for schizophrenia. At a time in the late 1970s, in the UK certainly, if you had any kind of mental health disorder, society's answer was to put you into some sort of asylum and force feed you pills. A lot of that ignorance still maintains itself today. I was shocked recently to find that in the UK, we're still sectioning 150 people a day for mental health disorders in the UK.
Didn't know that.
And that's, whatever that numbers is, I think it extrapolates out to something like 55,000, which I was just horrified at. I think today we have a lot more awareness, for sure. That awareness can obviously be a two-edged sword. It can obviously lead to lots of anxiety, and it's also causing a lot of issues with youth, with adolescents, around how they manage their mental health.
Yeah.
But I think that I don't believe every generation has its own ignorance. I think it was just my dad's generation. It was just one of those things that just wasn't talked about. We still used words like lunatic and crazy and words today that we're not meant to say. I think it was just a byproduct from another era. He means well, but unfortunately my dad is never going to be the most empathetic of individuals.
And he has his experiences, and they are as valid and as valuable as other people's when you consider them in the context of what he has gone through. When we look at mental health and what is going on currently in the economy around cost of living and the financial crises that many people are finding themselves in, is that having a bigger effect on people's mental health from what you are seeing right now because of that sense of financial trauma?
mean, yeah, I believe so. I mean, certainly, okay, every country is coming out of the pandemic with different experiences.
Yeah.
Certainly here in Switzerland, we don't have anything like the economic turmoil that the UK is going through right now. But I think financial stress, financial anxiety is certainly an area that we haven't possibly considered historically. So yeah, when you look at suddenly people's interest rates and their payments doubling down on whether it's their lease for their car or for their credit card debts or their mortgage payments, that's going to keep people up and awake at night. And if you're not, so many of the mental health issues we face as a society are caused by lack of sleep. And having so much cortisol flowing through you when you're waking up, you're exhausted, you're tired, whether it's in menopause or just because you're worried about how you're going to pay the bills. So we are, I certainly think, becoming much more anxious as a society. Although at the same time, diagnosis is also becoming much more prevalent. And there's a lot of, how would you say, controversy around diagnosis of mental health disorders. And some people would say it's become a lot easier to get diagnosed. And certainly we're seeing some children who are gaming the system to get an ADHD diagnosis so they can get an extra 15, 20 minutes from their exams. But as a whole, I think, yes, financial anxiety, stress can have a huge impact on us. And historically, again, it comes back to a man, whether you agree rightly or wrongly, would take a lot of that pressure on himself and not necessarily share that with his loved ones. And that also is the root cause of a lot of problems as well. The old adage of problem shared is problem halved, I think, has never been truer for the types of situations we're living through right now.
I think you talking about this is one of the key reasons why I made the decision back in November 2022 to invite male guests onto the show. Up until that point in time, I only had female guests on the show, even though, I do have a male audience as well. And one of the key drivers for that was, if I'm encouraging people to talk about money more, how can I only be encouraging half of, the demographic, essentially? And I think that extends into what we're talking about now with regards to, men and their mental health not opening up because of that need to be seen to be the man, whatever that connotation, whatever that meaning is to that individual. So as a man, how can we women help our men to open up and have that conversation? Because some of us may not even be aware that turmoil, that turbulence is going on because he's putting on a good show. He's putting on that face that I'm managing it all. So how do we effectively have that conversation without it just being a challenge?
I mean, all I can really share, I think, here, Lesley, is what the support of my wife when I was at my lowest ebb. She didn't put too much pressure on. She left breadcrumbs and tried to encourage me to talk, but under my own terms. There was never any raised voices. It was always just trying to encourage a conversation. And I think it's just being there for your loved one. Men generally, we internalize so much. We smash it when we're anxious or we're angry. The prevalence of our behaviours, it's substance abuse, whether it's drink, drugs, or we smash stuff up. It's a little bit of a sweeping generalisation, but generally the way men deal with things. But I think it's patience, actually. There are several good resources online. I read one recently for a post I wrote. We could probably find the details and talk about it. But I think it's really just being there for the guy, not or for the partner, not making any judgments, but just giving him the time and the space to open up. Because guys, when we are badgered or asked lots of questions, we naturally shut down.
Yeah.
So it's giving us the space to breathe, the space to be, and just knowing that you have someone there who loves you unconditionally and who isn't putting pressure on you is hugely not gratifying, it's the wrong word, but it just is an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
When you've got someone that you know that they will stop you falling. They've got your back. That's an incredible feeling, and certainly I'm very, very fortunate to have that with my better half, with my wife. I'm sure lots of guys have it as well, but maybe because they don't want to talk about it, they maybe don't realize how lucky they are. But it's a long-winded answer. I think
no, it's very
just
helpful.
Try not to force it out of guys. We shut down when not when we're nagged, but when we're asked lots of questions. We just need time, space, and a safe space to be able to share our frustrations, our vulnerabilities.
Yeah. And, the truth is, it isn't just, men that feel like that. What you described there, I had a very, very similar, very small period, but I can remember in October of 21, feeling really low, really demotivated. And I think we were coming out of the pandemic and we did not know what was going to happen. And as usual, the media was putting out, all a variety of depressing messages that the media puts out. And I am the kind of person who no man's an island other than for Lesley. Lesley is an island, or Lesley was an island. And I can remember I'm in my garden office and I can remember going down to my house and feeling really upset that my husband didn't notice that I was upset. And, sitting on the sofa and thinking, well, why does he not notice I'm upset? Why is he not asking me, am I okay? And the reason why he wasn't asking if I was okay is because Lesley is always okay. He didn't have any indication that Lesley wasn't okay until there was something on TV that triggered the waterworks and I was howling. He still hadn't noticed that I was howling until he glanced. He went, are you okay? And then, I had that complete and utter breakdown. But, only for a very small amount of time, minutes, not hours or days or anything like that. But that clearly demonstrated to me as well the need to be vulnerable, the need to be honest, the need to recognize you don't need to have this tough outer exterior. I'm a Cancerian crab, so I put it down to that essentially. So I think everything that you shared there was really valuable because I think I understand how I operate, but I don't necessarily understand how my husband operates, although he is very, very even in his emotional outlets, etc. But I think for the ladies listening or for the men listening, it's really important to understand that give that person the time, let them share what they want to share, and just be there when they are ready to share.
Yeah, I think it's a nice way of looking at it, and actually remind me of story there about talking to your husband and him not recognizing you're okay reminded me of something on Instagram recently that my wife shared with me. And I want to say her name's either Renee Brown or Brown.
Brené Brown.
But
Yeah.
Brené Brown, thank you. We can maybe find the link and put it in the comments afterwards to people. But she talked about the fact how that, we say that a marriage is 50-50, or a relationship is 50-50. And her premise was actually that, Tosh, depending on where you are each day in terms of how you're feeling, one person might be at 80% and the other might be at 20%. And her and her husband each day check in, see where they are.
Yeah.
And as long as they can both get to 100%, then they're good.
Yeah.
If one of them says, I'm struggling today, I'm only at 20%, and the other one's at, say, 50%, then they sit down to try and work out how can they support each other to get to that 30% extra, to get them to that 100% for the day. And it was a really fantastic way of sharing the load, and also not realizing that the burden should always fall on the wife. As society historically, we put a lot of pressure on the wife as the caregiver,
the nurturer.
Yeah, exactly. Who puts food on the table, the mother, whatever it might be. This way, they shared the responsibilities evenly throughout their relationship, their journey through life, and that was really. She says it much nicer than I'm expressing it, but it was a really, I thought it was a really nice way of sharing the load together.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. And in my own relationship with my husband, we notice that we're never ever both down at the same time. So if one is down, the other will bring the other up, and vice versa. There's only been once, maybe twice, where we have both been down at the same time, and the alarm bells have gone off then. Oh my God, how can we both be down? And I think that instantly has brought us back up to have that realization. I haven't seen that Brené Brown conversation, so I'm going to look it up, because that is a really, really good reference point for accepting you can be equal. You can take on your shared balance of the responsibility for the emotional status of the relationship, but it doesn't need to fall on one pair of shoulders all the time. It's shared equitably over the course of time. And I think probably that's what we all want in any relationship that we have, is over the course of the relationship, there will be that support that one needs to give more than the other, but in other situations the roles reverse. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that is really, really helpful. So tell me more about your new business, what you're doing.
So my new business is called OT, which is the Latin genitive for otium, which means peace, calm, and ease. And what we're doing really is measuring, monitoring, and tracking mental health in schools and in the workplace. We track that over time, and then depending on what the data shows, we then develop interventions to tackle the various data points. So, for example, we might do a survey of school well-being and look, for example, at adolescents, and that might show the school or the kids have issues with self-harm or substance abuse or lack of sense of belonging, and we can then design interventions to tackle those particular issues. And we track these data points over the course of a year. So you can really start to even out the various environmental factors and actually get a true sense of what's going on.
And how open are schools to that approach right now? Because it sounds fundamentally vital, I think, to schools, particularly right now.
So certainly here in Switzerland, we don't have the same level of, the education sector is not funded in the same way as you are in the UK. So mental health and education are two distinct silos that can't merge here in Switzerland. So I'm at the moment talking to international schools predominantly. there's a lot of there's a lot of interest there, but there is a fear that once they open Pandora's box, they're not sure what they're going to find. But every head teacher, I mean, schooling has always been difficult. Even before the pandemic just made it, it shined a microscope on it and made it a lot harder. But every head teacher knows his or her issues within the school. It's just how do they confront it? So the story resonates, but it's probably a little bit slower than we would hope. And in corporates, the same. There's a lot of noise, some great discussions going on, but maybe not seeing as much of an uptake as we would have hoped. But then it's also early days.
Yeah. And I think that is the thing, isn't it? With financial well-being, with mental health, with what is going to shake out within organizations as a result of people experiencing those shocks. Organizations, be that schools, companies, etc., are not fully appreciating, I don't think, the impact right now. So they're trying to do almost an impact analysis at the same time as trying to put sticking plasters in place where they can, as opposed to looking at a wider, more holistic approach that is going to create a way of managing this for the long term, rather than simply managing the symptoms of the individuals as they're experiencing them right now.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Certainly, I think we'll see a sea change in the next 3 years. Certainly with companies realizing that they have, whether it's because of the Equalities Act or because of other legislation, but they do have a legal duty of care to look after the physical and mental health of their staff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great book by a professor from Stanford, I think it is, called Jeffrey Fetter. And he talks about the book is called Dying for a Paycheck. And in there, he talks about the correlation between stress at work that is making people ill, causing families to rupture, people losing their jobs because they can't handle the stress, the anxiety, and how, as a society, work is making us ill. It's causing cancer, it's causing diabetes. And I think for those companies that are pragmatic and that respect their employees and realize that it's not just about a paycheck, they're the ones who are going to succeed here.
Absolutely.
We're already seeing Generation Z refusing to work for companies who don't have well-being strategies in place, etc. It's no longer about how much money you take home. There is an opportunity for companies, schools, whoever it might be, to prioritize the mental health and the well-being of their staff over and above that of a paycheck. And for those that do, the opportunities will be tremendous.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think partly that comes down to Gen Z appear to have a better sense of self-value than, a number of the previous generations seem to have had, and want to ensure that themselves, are valued, and are not just becoming, as you say, an employee with a paycheck at the end of it, but what happens in between with regards the stress, the pressure, the financial issues that are going on, the mental health issues that are going on, the isolation, etc. All that feeds into that. And maybe Gen X are the ones that are going to make a stand, and that appears to be the case, are going to make a stand and make companies change, which appears to a certain extent to be the only way companies are going to change, because they're being made to change.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, if you come back to the point about our generation being stoic and not wanting to make a fuss, Gen Z are the ones leading the charge
Yeah.
at that. They're the generation that talks most about their mental health and well-being. They also have some of the worst prevalence of mental health and well-being, but at the same time, they're willing to get help, to seek treatment, to talk to therapists, and they have much more self-compassion and are much more self-aware. So that can only be a good thing. But I mean, it must be incredibly hard to be heading up a firm and looking at having to deal with 5 generations of talent and having to then segment your offering, whether it's training or mental health, around age and gender. Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
But for those companies that do take that, do go that extra mile, and especially with the talent wars we've got, and the fact people quiet quitting, something like they say 80% of people are not engaged at work.
Yeah.
Now, these are crazy statistics.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's rocket science to make a difference.
Yeah.
The problem is some companies, they're like bunnies in headlights. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They don't know where to start. And for us, that's why we say measure it first and actually get some real evidence-based data, and then you can start to make a difference based on that data rather than just whistling in the wind.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So how can people connect with you, Martin?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. And then all my contact details, email, etc., are on there. So I would say just look at my LinkedIn profile, and if any of that resonates, I'd be very happy for people to reach out.
And those details will be in the show notes, so making it very, very easy for people to connect with you. Thank you very much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you shining a spotlight on how we can all help each other to open up and to have those conversations. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me, Lesley. It's been great, and look forward to continuing the conversation with yourself and with others on this topic, because it's going to take a long time still to normalize the narrative, but we do our little bit one day at a time.
Absolutely, totally agree. Thank you again.
Thank you.